In a world where power and race collide, what happens when a respected judge faces prejudice right in his own courtroom? Stay tuned. You won't believe what comes next. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and be part of my journey to reach 1,000 subscribers by the end of the year. Let's make it happen together. The courtroom fell into an intense hush as Judge Nathaniel Pierce adjusted his glasses, preparing for the high-profile case of the day. Police misconduct. Officer Logan Baker, seated at the defendant's table, had been accused of brutally assaulting an innocent black man during an unwarranted stop. Nathaniel, as the judge, felt the gravity of the trial. It was a symbol of the ongoing struggle for justice and equality. As Prosecutor James Daniels laid out the facts of the case, Logan's cold stare remained fixed on Nathaniel, filled with disdain. The tension was undeniable, but Nathaniel had faced this type of hostility before. Being a black judge meant navigating not just the law, but the racial prejudices that often followed. Defense attorney Monica Vargas, while confident, seemed uneasy about her role in defending Logan. She claimed her client had acted within the law, but even she couldn't ignore the moral weight of the case. Outside the courthouse, protests erupted, the community's demand for justice louder than ever. As the trial progressed, Nathaniel found himself reflecting on the personal and societal battles he had faced throughout his life. But one thing was certain: no matter how deep the prejudices ran, he was ready to see this through. Stay tuned to see how this dramatic courtroom battle unfolds. The following morning, Judge Nathaniel Pierce sat at his desk, preparing himself mentally for another grueling day in court. The weight of the case still lingered in his mind. As he straightened his robe, Lena, his wife, stood nearby, her presence a comforting reminder of the support he had outside of the courtroom. "You'll get through this," she said, her voice steady yet gentle. Nathaniel nodded, though his thoughts were still clouded with memories of his own encounters with systemic racism. This trial was not just about Officer Logan Baker. It was about confronting a system that had marginalized people like him for centuries. He had to remain focused and impartial, but the personal stakes were high. Back in the courtroom, the atmosphere was electric. Spectators filled the seats, eager to witness the next stage of the trial. As Nathaniel took his place at the bench, he noticed the subtle tension between Monica Vargas and her client, Officer Logan. Monica's professionalism remained intact, but Nathaniel could see the internal struggle behind her eyes. Defending a man accused of such blatant misconduct was testing her moral compass. As the prosecution presented its witnesses, each testimony painted a chilling picture of the night in question. The victim, a young black man named Darnell, described the harrowing experience of being stopped by Logan. His voice trembled as he recounted how the routine stop turned violent without provocation. Logan, however, remained stoic, his expression unreadable, though his occasional glares toward Nathaniel didn't go unnoticed. He knew exactly what he was doing, trying to unnerve the judge with his silent defiance. But Nathaniel wasn't shaken. He had faced far worse in his life. During a brief recess, Monica paced the courthouse hallway, conflicted. Every part of her legal training told her to defend her client to the best of her ability. But deep down, she knew Logan represented everything she despised about the justice system. She thought back to her own experiences of discrimination and wondered if defending Logan was worth compromising her values. When she returned to the holding cell to speak with Logan, his hostility had only grown. "I'm not paying you to sit there and look pretty," Logan snapped, his voice dripping with contempt. Monica kept her composure, but inside, she was fuming. "I'm here to give you the best defense possible, but you need to understand the seriousness of this situation," Logan scoffed. "Serious? You think this is serious? This is just another black man playing the victim card." Monica bit her tongue. She knew there was no reasoning with someone so entrenched in his prejudices. But in that moment, she made a decision. She would continue to do her job, But she wouldn't let Logan's toxic beliefs influence her integrity. As the trial resumed, tensions rose. The evidence against Logan was mounting, and the crowd outside the courthouse grew larger, demanding justice. The protests were no longer just about this case. They were about fighting against an entire system of racial bias and police brutality. Inside the courtroom, Nathaniel remained steadfast, knowing he had a responsibility to ensure that justice was served. The case was closing in on its final stages, and soon, the jury would deliberate. Nathaniel knew that whatever the outcome, this trial would leave a lasting impact, not just on the people involved, but on the entire community watching from the sidelines. Later that evening, Nathaniel sat in his study, reviewing the case files one last time. Lena walked in, offering him a cup of tea. She could sense the burden he was carrying. "You're doing everything you can," she said softly. Nathaniel nodded, though the weight of his responsibility still hung over him. "It's not just this case, Lena. It's the bigger picture. It's the fight for equality, for justice. And sometimes, it feels like we're taking 2 steps back for every step forward." Lena smiled gently. "But you're still moving forward, and that's what matters." The final day of the trial arrived, and the courtroom was packed. The jury had deliberated, and now it was time for the verdict. Officer Logan Baker sat stone-faced as the jury filed back into the room, their expressions serious. Nathaniel's heart pounded as he prepared to deliver the verdict. The courtroom was silent, every eye focused on him. This court finds the defendant. Stay tuned for the next part of this intense courtroom drama. Will justice prevail, or will prejudice win out? Make sure to like and subscribe to follow this story and more. The courtroom buzzed with tension as Judge Nathaniel Pierce prepared to deliver the verdict. He could feel the weight of anticipation pressing down on everyone present, their hopes and fears hanging in the balance. Officer Logan Baker, seated at the defense table, stared straight ahead, his jaw clenched, betraying none of the anxiety churning within him. Nathaniel took a deep breath, reminding himself of the oath he had taken to uphold justice and the law. He glanced over at the jury, who shifted uncomfortably in their seats, their decision weighing heavily on their conscience. "The defendant, Officer Logan Baker, is," he began, his voice steady but filled with gravitas, "guilty of excessive force against the victim, Mr. Darnell Johnson." Gasps echoed throughout the courtroom. Darnell's family erupted in tears of relief, embracing one another as a wave of emotion swept over them. Outside, the crowd of protesters erupted into cheers, their chants of justice ringing through the air. Logan's face twisted in disbelief, anger flashing in his cold blue eyes. He slammed his hand on the table, a primal instinct surfacing as he struggled to process the verdict. Nathaniel raised his hand, silencing the courtroom. "Order," he commanded, his voice cutting through the chaos. "I will not tolerate disruptions in my courtroom. We will proceed with the sentencing." As the gavel fell, Nathaniel felt a mix of relief and sorrow. He had done his duty, but the reality of what that meant weighed heavily on him. The ramifications of this verdict stretched far beyond the single case. It was a moment of reckoning for a system that had failed so many. As Logan was led away in handcuffs, the atmosphere shifted. Some in the gallery celebrated, while others looked on in shock, still grappling with the implications of a guilty verdict against a police officer. Nathaniel stood at the bench, feeling the moment slip through his fingers. Later that day, he found solace in his office, staring out the window at the bustling streets below. He was still processing everything that had transpired when Lena entered, her eyes filled with concern. "You did what you had to do," she reassured him, sitting beside him. "But I can see this is weighing on you. I just can't shake the feeling that this is only the beginning," Nathaniel replied, his voice laced with fatigue. "This case was a step forward, but there's so much more to be done. I want to see real change, real justice. Not just for Darnell, but for everyone who suffered. Lena placed a hand on his shoulder. And you will. One verdict at a time. You have a platform, and you're using it. That's more than many do. As the days passed, Nathaniel became increasingly involved in community outreach programs focused on justice reform. He spoke at town halls, engaging with citizens and listening to their stories. The verdict had ignited a spark within him, a drive to make a difference beyond the courtroom walls. Meanwhile, Monica Vargas faced her own reckoning. The case had taken a toll on her conscience, and she decided to step away from high-profile defense work. She realized that defending those who perpetuated injustice wasn't a path she could continue on. With each passing day, her desire to fight for justice grew stronger. In the weeks following the trial, Darnell's family held a press conference, thanking the community for their support and vowing to continue advocating for change. Nathaniel watched from the audience, feeling a renewed sense of hope as Darnell spoke passionately about the need for police reform and accountability. "We cannot allow this to be just another case," Darnell said, his voice strong and determined. "We need to ensure that no one else has to go through what I went through." Inspired by Darnell's words, Nathaniel reached out to him, proposing a collaboration. Together, they organized community meetings to discuss police practices and encourage dialogue between law enforcement and the community. Nathaniel wanted to create a space where people felt heard and valued, a crucial step toward rebuilding trust. As the weeks turned into months, change began to take root. Citizens who once felt powerless started to mobilize, demanding accountability from their local police department. Protests continued, but they were now driven by a unified voice for justice. Nathaniel knew that change wouldn't come overnight, but he was committed to doing the work. He had learned that justice was not just about the verdicts handed down in a courtroom. It was about creating an environment where every individual felt safe, respected, and valued. One evening, Nathaniel found himself back in the courtroom for a community meeting. The room was filled with concerned citizens, eager to engage in conversations about justice, equality, and reform. As he addressed the crowd, Nathaniel felt a sense of purpose that had been rekindled within him. "This is just the beginning," he said, his voice resonating with conviction. "We have the power to change our system for the better, and it starts with us. Together, we can create a future where justice is not just an ideal, but a reality for all." The audience erupted in applause, and Nathaniel smiled, feeling a wave of hope wash over him. It was clear that the fight was far from over, but he was ready to stand alongside those who sought justice and equality. As the evening wore on, Nathaniel looked out at the faces in the crowd, feeling a deep sense of solidarity. They were all in this together, and with their combined strength, they would make a difference. Stay tuned for more stories of resilience, justice, and the fight for equality. Don't forget to like and subscribe as we continue this journey together.